Hi, this is Paul. I have a very special guest. We've been going back and forth on Twitter for a while now. He's taken an interest in what I've been doing, and I'm taking an interest in what he's been doing. We actually met for lunch halfway between Sacramento and San Francisco. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation, having it recorded. Obviously, we didn't record our lunch conversation, which was more personal, and it kind of takes the edge off me wanting to do much biography. But so I'll let you do whatever kind of biography you want to do, and then we'll go where you think is best to begin.
Oh, geez. My name is Hyun. I'm in San Francisco. I'm finishing up my second master's right now in philosophy. I'm writing my thesis right now, and it's kind of at that intersection between agency and artificial intelligence and that kind of area, and it's leading me straight into theology. What really got me into your videos was your Hubert Dreyfus video, which was talking about things like the frame problem in AI. And seeing that, I was like, yeah, okay, this is my guy. And I've just kind of been watching videos and making comments ever since.
Okay. Well, why the second master's in philosophy? I mean, because philosophy is just the greatest thing right now to get high-paying jobs and really hot chicks. Is that it?
I actually was, in the tech scene. I'm in San Francisco. I was working on, it's a I won't name the company, but it's a multinational corporation. I was doing a lot of their early artificial intelligence research and work, I suppose, is what I would say. And, I kind of came to this conclusion that all of this is just marketing jargon and it's garbage and none of it's going to work. And this was 7 years ago. And, none of the companies in the Valley have actually made any significant progress. And so, a lot of why I wanted to study philosophy was because I wanted to study things like philosophy of mind. Like, how is it that we think that differs from how machines think? But also at that intersection, we can learn a lot more about how humanity differs, because for the first time, we've always compared humanity and human intelligence towards animals, right? But now we have this thing that is supposedly smarter and better than us. So it kind of gives us a nice juxtaposition of what we think is less than human intelligence and more than human intelligence. And at that intersection where neither of those can cross that threshold, that's where we are uniquely human. And that's what I'm very much interested in.
Now, when you talk about something that's smarter and better than us, this gets into this machine learning thing where we have, we figured out that we can't actually teach it. What we have to do is sort of create it as an organism in an environment and have it learn. And in that way, perhaps it will evolve beyond us. Is that fair?
That's what we think, but there's a lot of problems. I think the first problem is the embodiment problem. I think all intelligent life, I would say, has a foundational intelligence level of knowing the difference between the inside and the outside. Computers have no, understanding of what that is, and I think that's going to be a major challenge. But I think even if it figures out that those representations of inside and outside, it still doesn't know how to make the relationship between inside and outside. And I think that's where we kind of talk about being, and we can get into that later, but that is crucial and to human intelligence, because humans have this capacity to represent relationships in a very complex way against many different numbers of things, and we can abstract that relationship. And I think that's where intelligence comes from.
I'm just taking a lot of notes here. Now, we've toyed with doing this conversation a few times before. Why was now the right time? You finally said, okay, now we'll do it. I mean, maybe part of it's your schedule, I'm sure, but why, in terms of, because my channel is very personal in that I'm just sort of weaving all over the place, usually dependent on the latest video that I saw, or maybe a sermon series I'm doing, or a conversation I had with someone. So why now?
I think it's because you're digging into this secret sacred self idea. And I think and I think identity has a lot to do with intelligence. You know, like one of the things that really strikes me is this. Have you heard of the self-mirror test, where you know, put a mirror in front of an animal, you put a dot on the animal, and looking at the mirror, some animals can notice the dot and they'll peck at it or something, but almost all animals won't.
That's interesting.
And so what that seems to tell me is that animals, my interpretation is that almost all animals have no conception of the self outside of the phenomenal self. And so a high level of intelligence means I can not only recognize myself in a mirror and draw this relationship of identity across both of them, but I can go ahead and imagine myself like flying through space, or, you know, thinking about how I would fit in, you know, things like modern monetary theory or all kinds of different things. And so, you know, that's kind of where we can kind of draw ideas about the secret sacred self, you know, the phenomenal subject versus myself as objective representation and things like that. And that gets into things like intelligence and, you know, the rest of the other things that we've been talking about.
Now, like many of the terms that I come up with, I came up with this term just because I was making a video, and I start talking about something, I start thinking out loud, and words start coming out of my mouth, and then I hear myself making those words out of my mouth, and something in me says, oh, that's sort of a good representation of something that I've been trying to get at but can't quite get a handle on, as we would say in this exaptation way. So when you hear about a secret sacred self, what did you hear when I said that?
You know, I'm still a little bit unclear on that, and I kind of wanted to use this conversation to clear that up. But, you know, I think the way I brought it to you was the movie Fight Club.
Yeah.
I think Chuck Palahniuk actually outsmarts Nietzsche in a lot of different ways. But when you say secret sacred self, I'm not 100% sure if you're talking about Tyler Durden, the guy that the narrator wants to be, or the narrator as the narrator. But that we can split that into the phenomenal self as the narrator, the person going through all the things, and then the recognitional self as Tyler Durden. This is the projected self, the self that he wants to be and shows to other people. But, you know, Tyler Durden in that movie isn't real. You know, however we make that, he's only real to the narrator. And so, you know, when you talk about things like Cartesian dualism, Tyler Durden isn't you know, extended material, but he's also not the thinking thing. So now we have this dualism, but we have this third category that we often believe to be real. So the Stanford Marshmallow test, everyone cites that as saying, you know, oh, you know, if you hold out on your if you delay gratification, you'll have a successful life. There was another side experiment that went along with that, and it was essentially like, so what you do is you put the marshmallow in front of the kid and see how long they can last. One of the side experiments was, okay, that we're going to put a marshmallow in front of you and see how long you last before you eat it. The other one is we're going to tell you to think about a marshmallow and not have the marshmallow in the room and see how long you last. Children in both groups lasted, the one with the marshmallow in front of them lasted a little bit less than the one who was thinking about it. So that tells me that thinking about an object and having that object inside of your head is almost as good as having the actual physical object. And so now we have this weird duality of like, well, what is a real object? What is, and so a lot of my philosophical work has kind of been like, rather than thinking about material and non-material, you know, this barrier between object as physical object, but also mental object has been kind of destroyed, right? So we no longer, the internet makes us think that, you know, words on the page are actually reflective of things that are going on in the real world. And so this barrier that we used to have is just collapsing. And I think this is what Barfield is talking about when he talks about idolatry, is when we think of the words and the representations as being actually real. And on the flip side, this is what we mean by we're in a simulation, is when, you know, all the language and all the terms that we use actually create a reality that is separate from physical reality, and we kind of treat it as being real. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, it was a good answer. And a lot of before I ever started this YouTube thing, or Jordan Peterson, or even Jonathan Haidt, years and years ago, when I was thinking about writing a book, I was thinking along some of these lines in terms of Christianity, the resurrection, relationality. What exactly, how does all of this play in this world where the ascension, for example, so the ascension, I think more than the resurrection, even though everybody points to the resurrection, the ascension more than the resurrection highlights the mass transition of the world from one image to another. C.S. Lewis called that the discarded image. And part of, I think, where we're at now with the end of modernity is the continual collapse of physicalism as a viable model for the world as we're finding it. And one of the interesting things, so I was trained in theology in the 80s, which was sort of after, in modernity, theology tried to save the church from physicalism in many ways. And you see this through the entire modernism versus fundamentalism fight, even though both sides in many ways capitulated. One denied, one affirmed. And so much theology was just trying to adapt to the collapse of the discarded image. And now that the forces that collapse the discarded image are they themselves collapsing, there's this mad scramble to figure out, where do we go next? And so the way the secret sacred self emerged was that I increasingly saw people, this was at its most widespread, I'd say, non-self-conscious display among young people and their sexuality. Mm-hmm. That when you have someone saying, I am a woman in a man's body, when man and woman is so deeply tied to physicality, at least for the vast majority of human beings, something interesting is going on. And that of course was something that caught a lot of cultural attention. But when I would hear someone say something like, I'm a spiritual being trapped in a material body, which I would hear New Age friends say, that always caught my attention, because that's a rather, it wasn't in the area of sexuality, obviously, but it was in many ways a similar thing. Mm-hmm. And having had at least some exposure to church history, ancient heresies, it all sounded a little bit familiar. And so when I looked at young people trying to find themselves, I thought it was tremendously ironic that on one hand, they would engage in this quest for authenticity, as we call it, which is basically framing it as there's a true self somewhere that I have been disassociated from, and I have to find that true self. And you begin to realize that despite 100 years of psychology and sociology basically saying that the self you have is constructed and attestable via relationships with your parents, physiology, hormones in the womb, yada, 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 that there is this other self somewhere in a universe that we have for the last few hundred years been skeptical of, that actually has to be orienting you on this quest for authenticity and realization unto an individual eschaton where this can be achieved. And so it's sacred in that it is the thing that can't be deconstructed. It is the base reality, is the foundation. It's secret because no one can find it but you. And you're looking for the self. So that's where, that's where the language came out of, just watching everything going on around me and saying these people are in a quest for their secret sacred self. And then listening to colleagues of mine who were increasingly using true self language as their way of either preserving people, trying to preserve people within a form of Christianity, or winning them over to a form of Christianity, whereas Christian discipleship is all about finding your true self. Now, some would be conservative and, let's say, associate that with Colossians, the book of Colossians. Others would be much more in the secret sacred self. And then you would find that side of Christianity sort of leading people towards, whether it's gay or straight or unicorn or what have you, as long as it feels authentic to you, that's where you should be. And Christ is up in heaven affirming that. And so just watching all this strangeness going on, thinking, my, this is strange. Where are we going? So it was interesting to me that that's the element that you really caught on to.
Yeah, if I could reframe that, what we're doing in postmodernity seems to be that we're, instead of idolizing physical objects, we're trading those in for mental objects, right? So you've heard the phrase, don't buy things, buy experiences. It's the same thing. We're just transferring it over. And so, rather than, I can go back to Fight Club. Originally the narrator wanted a nice condo, wanted all that nice IKEA furniture, wanted all this other thing, but
right.
He literally blows it up and focuses strictly on becoming Tyler Durden. He gives up all the physical things and says, I want to be this secret sacred self of me that sleeps with a bunch of women, is incredibly fit, and knows how to talk a good game, and all he does is whatever he wants to do anytime he wants. And so that's kind of where we're going, where I think Nietzsche becomes, and so we could say that's the Overman, or the Uberman, Nietzsche's Uberman. And so I think the argument that I would make is pretty similar to Jordan Peterson's argument, in that you can't make your own values, because what happens in the movie is that Tyler Durden he is the Uberman for the narrator, but he kind of becomes a force of nature on its own. But the problem is he doesn't know where all those values lead, because he's not omniscient and he's not omnipotent. And so that seems to be the fundamental thing, is that we can imagine ourselves being Tyler Durden, we can imagine ourselves being a unicorn or whatever we want. We have simply no idea how that plays out, because we are just not that intelligent.
Not that intelligent, not that well read, not that understanding. It comes, we almost always frame it in terms of intelligence, which is rather a remarkably limited concept, even for psychologists that love to, Jordan Peterson or John Vervaeke, that like to look at, big G, general intelligence, as if it's big G gravity. And this, I think, is part of the reason why a lot of the conversations now are focusing on wisdom and that language, because wisdom is sort of intelligence plus experience, and not simply individual experience, but human experience, collective experience, experience that has been narrated and borne witness to throughout ages and ages, which again is also deeply tied to Jordan Peterson, because even though he doesn't frame it in these words, I think a lot of his project has been finding, giving wisdom credibility, wisdom being the record of religious thought throughout history, especially Christianity for Peterson.
Yeah, I think not knowing what intelligence is a problem, but I think it's also a problem that we're frantically trying to quantify it. Like, how do you quantify wisdom? And that becomes, it becomes almost like a search for the secret sacred self, where we're we have this unintelligible, unknown object in mind, and we're desperately seeking it and foregoing everything else to do it. But it's also a problem that I heard this phrase yesterday, and it was something like, people who are educated above their intelligence. This is, of course, the original sin, right? Like, I think people like Sam Harris tend to think of, or Brett Weinstein tend to think of sin as not having the right knowledge. We were ignorant, therefore we failed. But it seems like the biblical wisdom is more like, we sin because we have the wrong knowledge. And so now we kind of have this problem disambiguating what is wrong knowledge, what is bad knowledge, and we're losing the capacity to figure that out for ourselves, because there's just so much. Everyone's trying to be an epistemic agent for you. They're trying to tell you what to believe, what to think, and how to think. And I think that if you're object oriented, the object dictates the terms of how you exist. I guess that's the best way I can put it. And so, the phenomenology, things like, philosophies like that, is trying to resituate the subject in relation to the object, whether it's mental or physical. And I think that's I think where the big, I think that's where it'll eventually cash out, is when the subject is resituated so that they have a free relationship to the objects of the world. I think this is why Stoicism is catching on really big, is because it's saying no matter what that object is, you as subject have control over how you relate and situate yourself to that object. But what Stoicism lacks is, we can have those relationships. So we can say X relationship Y, right? So we have two objects in a relationship. And so Stoicism is saying you have control over that relationship. And so what Stoicism lacks is, what is the Platonic form of that relationship? And I think Christianity gives that answer by saying, well, it's love your neighbor, and love God as do that. And so what someone like Jonathan Pageau might say is theosis, is turning your relationship to the world closer to whatever the godly relationship to the world is. And that's how I kind of see it.
I think that's really helpful. I think it's very helpful. The intelligence, so for John Vervaeke, his relevance realization, which is a terrifically clever approach to intelligence, aligns with that, because relevance realization, intelligence is sort of, as you say, and that's that sense analogous to the Stoicism, because intelligence we sort of imagine as, we always have these images, the CPU horsepower. So it's the latest Intel chip, or the new Mac, X1 Pro or M1 Pro or Max. The Apple has some terrible branding. It's amazing. They're amazingly bad at branding for such a successful corporation. But the intelligence is almost imagined to be the CPU or CPU GPU that's inside your brain. In that way, it's cut off from the context. Whereas reframing intelligence as relevance realization with Vervaekean sort of transjective, it tries, again, just as you say, in terms of the approach to phenomenology, to reintegrate the relational aspect between subject and object. And I think you're right that, the Christian approach then is in fact love. And that, which, I remember the first time I heard Jonathan Pageau, someone asked him in a Q&A to define love. He talked about the difference, that love is, in a sense, the thing that spans the difference, let's say, in a familial way. I mean, it can be eros in terms of to take, it can be agape in terms of to give, it can be phileo in terms of to partner, but love is the way that we span the difference between subject and object. It's the proper way to do so. And I think, in terms of listening to the video I just did 2 days ago, in terms of Vervaeke talking to Rafe Kelly about understanding, where did I go? What his, basically, love for the other, it's being is good.
Right.
And that is then the assumption that you need to have underneath this to actually permit love and not simply hostility and a permanent barrier. So, you know, these things to me are sort of, I mean, people always say, well, you should write a book. And it's like, I'm not going to write a book until I feel like I actually know a few things. And it takes a remarkably long time to feel like you actually know a few things to put something on paper, which for me is a very different thing than putting something out in this sea of YouTube, which is, you know, not terribly searchable. Yeah, you can find clips and play them, but it's analogous to speech rather than writing. So where is this going for you? I mean, people don't take on, you know, you obviously, you had a career in the, you know, in the computer industry and in that whole world, which is right now full of status and full of monetary reward. And so to step out of it into really a leisure thinking space, which is, we know what school is. How for you is this important?
You know, I think that's what my philosophy is kind of leaning towards, is that it to say, a lot of people ask me, you know, you're getting a philosophy degree, what are you going to do after? And it's always this object-oriented space of like, okay, well, you did this, now this must occur because of that. And so I'm trying to resituate myself as, well, what is my relationship to the other things? And that's always just the constant doing, more like a mode as opposed to, you know, an object. And you know, if I may kind of switch the topic, I think that is my biggest objection to someone like Jordan Peterson, is that he says meaning comes from pursuing an object. And, you know, so basically meaning for him then becomes this constant pursuit of objects, and it is the pursuit that drives meaning. And so there's no room left for someone to not be pursuing anything and be fulfilled, or say being is good, things like that. And so, you know, what I want to get out of this, you know, I've been doing a lot of like writing, you know, maybe I can just do, I don't know. I think for right now, I'm still writing my thesis, but I have a job lined up starting next week. So, you know, I think I'm just going to try to just live a normal life for a while and just try to, you know, do the reading and philosophy on the side and see what comes out of that. But I think for me, I think philosophy, one of my lecturers actually had a Twitter thread about how philosophy is very, very liberal. And I was thinking, no, actually, philosophy has actually made me more conservative, but also has made me turn towards theology. You know, because, you know, when someone like John Vervaeke says something like, you know, relevance realization, you still have to kind of ask the question, well, where does that come from, right? You know, when we talk about, you know, computing power as being massively scalable, massively fast and powerful. The thing about being human is that, you know, the frame problem isn't really a problem. The frame problem is extents on knowledge so that we may come up with some solution to that. If we were able to see everything, be omniscient and be omnipotent, you know, that would not bode well for us either. And so, you know, those kinds of questions kind of come up. And I think that, you know, a lot of my, not a lot, but, you know, I've spent some time going back to Thomas Aquinas, because he talks about being as a mode or as analogical. And so, you know, if we have that space between subject and object as being a relationship, an analogy would be something like, well, what is the relationship between two relationships? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so, you know, what religion and what Christianity does is it actually gives you a relationship to analogically duplicate that relationship from you as subject. And that's kind of how I've been seeing religion. And once you connect all the nodes and links together, you actually do get something like a structure or a framework. That's the kind of language that we've been using. And so I've kind of come to see religion as a framework that's out there, that's already been cast, and that's well known to work and has been put in literature. And one of your tasks as a subject of experience is to fulfill that structure as broadly and as widely as you can with this guide in place.
That's good. This morning, you tweeted at me and I'd already watched it, Hans Georg Mueller's video about philosophy. And he asked me how it was. I said I was disappointed. I was disappointed because one of the things that I noted in one of the reasons I like talking to John Vervaeke is he is not ignorant of religion. His experience of Christianity might be a little personally dated because he left it when he was young, but he's by no means ignorant of religion. And even when you listen to someone like Jonathan Haidt or now Hans-Georg Mueller, they're just talking in rather facile terms about fundamentalism and people in the Bible Belt and yada, yada, yada. It's kind of like, that's quite low resolution. And I really liked his introduction into the clip that I've used a few times now in terms of, why did Kant go after philosophy? Well, the rise of modern philosophy is very understandable given the enthusiasms around the physical sciences and the technological unleashings that those enthusiasms afforded. And then, of course, well, what if we could do the same for, and I think it's difficult for people to finish that sentence. And I would say, what if we can do the same for everything? What if we can wield everything? And when I think it through it that way, I land right in the middle of classical theology, is that the aspiration of wielding everything is in fact the original satanic demonic aspiration, which is to become Lord and master of all. And Tolkien builds that into Sauron. It's fascinating that, well, on one hand, I think we can all identify with that because that aspiration is in each of our hearts. Yet at the same time, philosophy, when I compare, and this is, and John knows my critique of his project, it's astoundingly ambitious. And I think possibly futilely ambitious, because philosophy itself has been, on one hand, remarkable in some ways, but astoundingly, it's been a complete failure as even compared to fundamentalisms and fundamentalism's ability to capture masses and to shape the history of the world. Yeah. So I appreciate what you just said about philosophy and religion, because as a religion, philosophy has been a failure.
Yeah, I tend to think of religion being upstream of philosophy, right? And then I also now kind of think of science being downstream from philosophy. So it'll be like religion, philosophy, and then science. And what's happening now, I think, is there's a crisis in science. Like we try to affix everything in place, make everything objects, and see how that wheel goes. And that's been undercut. And now philosophy has gone so analytic and so, again, very stuck in language and trying to say, well, what does this word mean, and analyzing in several hundred different ways. So that's kind of being undercut. And so now the project was to, if it was religion, philosophy, science, the project was to say, well, science is now above religion and science justifies religion. And that's always been the project. And now we're finding out that's not true. I think one of the things that really struck me while reading Plato was that, Plato has the Republic. He's written this giant book about how to behave and how to act in the world. And then there's this section about how there's, like, after you die, there's a chariot and there's a black horse and a white horse, and you circle the universe, blah, 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 blah. And people tend to kind of dismiss that as saying, oh, that's just everything else about Plato, amazing. But this part, kind of weird. And I can kind of see what they're saying, but what I think what they're missing is that if you take away the afterlife from Plato's philosophy, there's absolutely no reason to adhere to Plato's philosophy. That grounds the philosophy, because if you don't do what he suggests, then you kind of die and you have this terrible afterlife and you're reborn as something terrible. And so, we're trying to say, well, we're only going to keep the objective and we're going to remove the objects of the manifest or the spiritual, whatever. And so I think that's where science is kind of losing a lot of its grip.
That's really interesting. I just, my rough draft, it was in my rough draft, but I've been working on Paul in the New Testament. And so N.T. Wright obviously has written a ton about Paul. One of the things that he noted in his book, The Resurrection of the Son of God, was that if Homer is the Old Testament of the ancient world, Plato was the New Testament. And in that sense, N.T. Wright very much located Plato's vision of the afterlife as, in fact, in some ways, a vision that saved the ancient world from Homer. And then, of course, the relationship between visions of a Christian afterlife, almost nearly from the start, were deeply influenced by Plato, to the point that still today in many churches, many Christians have a vision of the afterlife which is fundamentally Platonic and not sort of informed by the imagery of the resurrection, which is super interesting in terms of what you just said. And I've never heard anybody say that about Plato before, which really fascinates me.
Yeah, I haven't really expounded on that too much, but I just thought that was really, especially going to a master's program in California, those are kinds of things that most people really don't even notice, but like, I don't even know if I could discuss that kind of stuff in a San Francisco classroom. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it is fascinating how, so we've had Plato for a long time, and for many, let's say, people running around on the street, name one philosopher, probably, if you're doing a Family Feud episode of 100 people surveyed, name a philosopher, Plato, ding, number one answer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's funny because every time I go back and read some Plato, it's like just the experience that you just testified to. I'm not sure his public relations and what is written in this book are really quite so together. And so maybe this gets into the power of ancient texts to help us see ourselves in relation to them. Because the reading of Plato 20 years ago and the reading of Plato today, I mean, it's of course history and historiography. It's just, it all keeps changing. And that's why we continue to write histories of very ancient things that we imagine are, nicely settled in their graves. Yeah. They continue to have new life with us because we're always seeing them from these changing perspectives.
Yeah. But, I think the major problem is that, we did get rid of grand narratives, and getting rid of grand narratives became the grand narrative. And so now people can pick and choose, what they declare as subjective and what they declare objective. And so now we just kind of have this, by rejecting the grand narrative, we've lost the common sense. And not common sense is something everyone should know, but common sense is, and here's the one place that we all can generally look up to as being agreed upon. We no longer have that. So everyone's just kind of doing everything on their own and self-justifying and, updating their secret sacred self every, couple of days and based on, what they desire at that exact moment and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I think that's why my project is to resituate the subject against the background of objects.
Well, the difficulty with, I was just chatting on Twitter with someone across the pond, someone quite younger than myself. And mentioning, the ironies of the fact that we want equality and all of this equality stuff, and then you turn sexuality over to the marketplace, and there's absolutely nothing quite as unequal as the sexual marketplace. And so then what then, then people are looking at what's happening and this, what's wrong with this stuff? Well, the difficulty, the first victim of someone who is on a lifelong quest for the secret sacred self is the sort of stability that all the rest of us are looking for in a brokered marketplace, that affords something that is durable enough to hit this ideal of monogamy, let's say. I mean, so because my daughters were living at home, we started watching The Bachelor, Bachelorette, these shows, which I had zero. I find them mind-numbingly boring at this point, which I won't admit to my daughters. They never watch my videos, so they'll never hear what I said. But everyone there is just looking for their person, and they want their person to be forever. And these are all children of divorce, or maybe they're not. And so the current Bachelorette just talks about how her parents have been married for 30 years and they're more in love each day. And, it's like, wow, talk about a platonic ideal. This is, what kind of person do you need to actually be able to achieve such a thing? Well, what you want actually is stability, because you're dynamic and you're going to want at least some degree of assurance that the person on the other side of the bed or on the other side of the breakfast table is to some degree the same person that was there yesterday, that they are trustworthy, they can be relied upon.
Yeah.
And what you have with an entire generation of people seeking their authentic self, and the authenticity as it plays out is almost always evolving.
Right.
It's simply impossible to afford stable relationships with such a person. Yeah. And, Jordan Peterson in his conversation with Brett Weinstein, noted that, if sort of this toddler identity play gets extended for 20, 30 years, you're simply not going to have enough lifetime to actually do or accomplish anything. It's sort of like maintaining toddlerhood, but now with bigger and more powerful tools with which you will likely make a wreck of your life. Yeah. And so, but this is in fact, in some ways, the new regime that is being promoted. And of course, young people say, well, this doesn't look so bad to me. Yeah, because you haven't played this game long enough.
I've been reading this book called Psychopolitics by a Korean-German philosopher named Byung-Chul Han, and he talks about the neoliberal regime as being one not of punishment or disallowing, but one of allowing. And by allowing you to do everything, and by kind of giving this false dichotomy of choices that people feel free, but they're actually not free. I guess that's the best way I can put it, is that they become limited in their freedom because they're so free to choose. And that becomes a tool of domination in that sense. And I'm not sure if I want to go as far as domination, but I think that's what's happening. We're accommodating for everything and everyone. And we're saying we're doing this out of kindness, but again, we don't know how these things play out, and maybe we shouldn't be so accommodating for everyone. But it also has this weird effect where it is equalizing in the sense that everyone is now becoming a homogeneous blob, right? We're all no skin color, no gender spectrum. Everything is just kind of we're all just one thing, which is the Harrison Bergeron problem. But I think what's making it worse is that the only thing you can't be in this, the only thing that's maximized is political party. So everyone's a gray blob except for your political affiliation, and that is what we're going to judge you on. And so we have this, again, dualism of like, you can do whatever you want to your body. You can put all the holes in it you want. You can, put all kinds of things into your body and out of your body, but you can't have the wrong thoughts. That becomes the biggest sin in this new mental object reality.
You can't have a non-affirming thought. It has to be all affirming all the time.
Right.
And I suspect that part of this is afforded. I mean, we are now well into the Industrial Revolution, where we are drowning in physical affluence. I mean, the size of my library is not necessarily remarkable. Now then you add all my Kindle books and all of my Logos books. We're drowning in what were the rare riches of ancient ages, thanks to the Industrial Revolution. And now, thanks to the computer revolution, that is getting exponentially larger in terms of things, the virtual space, as it goes into video, virtual reality. I mean, that space just continues to grow for us. And so now each of us is afforded, so much more mind space that, libertarianism has never been so affordable.
Yeah.
And, again, this to me always brings me to the beginning of C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce, where you begin in it's a gray city. And the power of this city is you can have anything you want just by thinking of it and desiring it. And you walk into the gray city and it's just row after row after row of mansions, because people are thinking about the best house that they can conceive of, but the mansions are empty. And well, why are the mansions empty? Well, it's because the dwellers are pushed further and further and further out. And so it talks about the distance between us and, say, someone like Napoleon, who has just kept, building his new worlds further and further and further out. And then you have this strange bus where these beings from this world, they want to go someplace else, and they've all got their own schemes. I want to bring something real back to this world to jumpstart the economy, because the problem of this world is everyone can have everything they want, but the one thing you can't have is a relationship with another person, because that's completely at odds with the absolute limitlessness of the possibilities. Now, of course, Lewis didn't have the cyberspace and the awareness of cyberspace as we have it, but his imagination was already informed by the affluence of the Industrial Revolution. So, and I see that all around me, people longing for community, but the price tag of community is you will not automatically be affirmed. And the more committed to the absolute demand of affirmation, the less capable we will be able to be in community, because it requires simply so much work of others and denies the fact that there are, in relationships to a degree, zero-sum games, that my unlimited affirmation cannot coexist with yours.
Yeah. This was so I think this was what Heidegger was warning us about when he talked about technology. To just give a short overview of it, he's saying, the Rhine River is no longer good. It becomes good for something. It becomes good for hydroelectrical power. And so what happens is, in the technological view, we begin to treat people as technology. So they become good for something and not good in themselves. And what he says is, in the technological view, things cannot be revealed. And that becomes the predominant view. So we kind of see people as objects. But that is to say, from our perspective, we strip that person of agency and we impose our whatever agency we want onto or into them, and we reap the benefits of that. And so now all of our relationships are becoming almost transactional, right? like you were talking about dating, dating is now just, here are my likes and dislikes. Here's my job. Do you like me or not? And so we kind of see each other as feature lists, not as good people, but, just a bunch of descriptions. And so that itself robs people of agency. It no longer do we see that person as a person, but as like, potential earnings, or, how smart they might be based on what kind of job they have. And how do those features interlock with the features of my life? And that's how I'm going to try to build a stable relationship. And that just seems misguided in my view.
No, and the fact that it can't work relationally.
Yeah.
None of us want to be seen as means to someone else's end. I was thinking about, and slavery has sort of become the dunking point for celebrity atheists with respect to Christianity.
Yeah.
And so, you're not going to, you're hard pressed to find in our society someone who will say, oh, slavery wasn't so bad. Well, you're going to get beat down pretty hard on that score. But we don't turn it around and say, why for us is slavery the great evil that for most of human history, it was seen simply as a function of normal life? And I think that has a lot to do with what you just described, in that slavery is sort of the ultimate way of turning people into a technology and turning people into a feature list. Well, it's featureless. Well, this slave has all of these things. And so the person inside is incidental. But of course, all of this in our current context is in the midst of a meaning crisis, which I think is fundamentally the horror of imagining that we ourselves are merely a feature list constructed by, as C.S. Lewis calls in the Book of Miracles, the whole show. There is no there. There is no agency. I am not a person. I am simply,
Right.
In past decades, it was a machine, the products of gears and tuning and springs. Today, it's just the products of programming. I am simply programmed by this massive machine, all the uniquenesses of my parents and their parents and their parents, but there is no ghost in the machine at all. And that then evokes this meaning crisis of meaninglessness, because I've been through, I remember when I bought my first computer, I thought, oh, I'll use this thing for years. I had resold it and was on to my second one within a year. And after that, I was, and right now I'm sitting in my office and there's 1, 2, 3, a few dead soldiers around. And I mean, it's like, wow, things have changed. And most of the computing is now being done on servers of Google and Microsoft and, Netflix and Amazon. So they're not even in the room.
Yeah. It does become this really like hyper level of reality. But to go back to what we're talking about, the secret sacred self is actually just a feature list. And so now we're treating ourselves as feature lists. And by treating something as a feature list, the relationship between, if I treat someone as a feature list, the relationship between me and that person dissolves, right?
Yes.
But what we're doing now is that we're treating our secret sacred self as a feature list. And so my relationship as a phenomenal subject to my purview, my projection of myself is dissolving. And I think that also is what contributes significantly to the meaning crisis.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really helpful.
And this is actually something closer to Albert Camus' point. He said absurdity is the divorce between the actor and a setting. And so, I can't work out if I'm the actor or the setting, but there's definitely that divorce that's happening, and I cannot have a full, meaningful relationship to the recognitional self, the recognized self. And I think this is why a lot of people are getting into things like surfing and rock climbing, is that they don't have time to think of themselves as themselves. They have to be there as they are. And that's what people are craving right now.
Well, and the part of what happens with the clouding out of the stars, which is our skepticism of the stars, which is what secularity does, is, well, how then do I navigate? And we're simply navigating by fads. Everybody's into rock climbing. Everybody's into surfing because we've seen it on Netflix and it's cool. And so, which to me puts us right back into the realms of these spirits that are, the spirit of surfing is on the rise. The spirit of rock climbing is on the rise. The spirit of striped bell-bottom jeans went out in the 1970s. And, you know, when I listened to Jonathan Haidt and Jordan Peterson's conversation, you could sort of continue to see the evolution, because Haidt is sort of saying, well, Durkheim noted that we gather around things, and religions are created because we cooperate in order to compete. And then Peterson says, yeah, but what is actually steering these things?
Yeah.
Is there anything steering these things, or is it all just emerging from the bottom? And of course, we're going to want to know if something is steering these things because of our ambitious self. That, well, if something is steering these things, I want to get ahead of the curve on what's steering these things, so I can we just go round and round and round with these things.
Yeah. I don't know that much about Rene Girard, but from what I understand, this is what mimetic desire is, but we've taken it to a meta level. Instead of using mimetic desire to desire an object, we're mimetically desiring desire.
Right.
We're watching what other people desire, but then that becomes another meta layer above it. So we're constantly just watching each other, trying to figure out what to desire. And the frequency of its cycling is just getting faster and faster and faster. And I don't think we're able to deal with it. I mean, you can even notice this in our financial sector, where, like, if you think about early trade, you would trade a thing for a thing, right? And then so fiat came, and that was backed by, metals and stuff like that. That was a while ago. I know that stuff has changed, but we used to basically trade things for money. And now what's done is that we're trading money, which is a tangible thing, for cryptocurrency. So we're trading a tangible thing for a representation. But now what's happening is that we're trading cryptocurrency for NFTs. So now we've just gone so meta that, our economy right now, a lot of it is just running on representations, trading for representations.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Maybe there's another thing of it, or maybe we just all maybe our reality just blasts off into space where everything is just completely virtual and nothing is real. And that's kind of a concern for me, because that's kind of analogous to what schizophrenia is, right? It's an inability to distinguish between what's outside and what's inside, but also that relationship between object and subject is kind of just severed almost in a way.
So one of the members of the local meetup here teaches psychology at a local community college, and he asked once about what I thought dreams were, and he gave me his idea. I mean, his idea, which was, is it the case that we are actually dreaming 24/7, and we only actually stop to recognize our dreams when we've got our eyes closed and all of our sense receivers shut down? And then when I've had a lot of experience with schizophrenics and a variety of people who are unmedicated mentally ill people, and it's this whole question of connection to appearances and the relationship between appearances and physicality. Of course, Owen Barfield with his his rainbow appearance question, where in fact is the rainbow? Is the rainbow in the sky, or is the rainbow in the observer, or is the rainbow somewhere between the sky and the observer? But is that appearance, how is that appearance real? Well, it's real enough to have the observer haul out a camera or call family and friends or make a mental note and a memory about that rainbow. And so in many ways, again, we're getting back to these very foundational philosophical questions about what on earth do we mean by this word real? And that to me seems to keep pushing us back into the direction that the immaterial finally governs the material, because that's otherwise you simply don't know where to locate the thing that's moving the world, because these fashions, which are clearly driving economies and driving physical human beings in a way that is reshaping the planet, what's driving them is not physical, it's relational, it's between us.
Yes. So, but I think there's a pushback in that, and it's a linguistic pushback, because what we're doing now is we're trying to affix language in place and say, this is what this objectively means. And so now we're kind of monkeying about with reality by monkeying around with words. And so it's kind of this split going two different directions, and there's really no mediating thing there. And I think that's what's kind of helping people lose their minds, to be quite frank.
Yeah. Now, we've been going at this an hour. Anything on your list that you said, well, I really want to talk to Paul about this? So
no, I somehow found a way to sneak most of it in.
Good. I don't know if you want to go more, or I got a homeless guy pounding on my door, so I'd either have to pause and handle that, or we can land the plane now and do this another time. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, let's both stew on this for a while, and then let's try to set something up and see what comes out of that.
Well, I'll be very interested to see what comes out of this, because I know that this conversation touches on what is of interest to. So there's sort of one side of my channel are people who just watch my channel, maybe leave a comment, maybe get involved in the Discord, yada, yada, yada. Another side of my channel are people who are sort of doing what I'm doing, making videos with ideas and conversations and such. And I'll be interested to see how many of them hear you and say, oh, I want to talk to this guy. So we'll see where that goes.
Cool. Yeah, that's going to be fun.
Well, I'm talking to John Vervaeke this afternoon. And so I'll be interested to see. I would love to, I mean, there's so many people that I would love to get together in the same room, and I'd love to have, you talk to John Vervaeke sometime and compare notes, because, I'm limited by what I know. And so it's often fun to watch others who know a lot. And I've been really impressed by the stuff that you put on Twitter. I'll probably put your Twitter address down in below, so those who are on Twitter can get a sense of what you're putting out, because I think I think you've been helpful to me, and you've often sent me some good things to read. And if you're helpful to me, I assume you'll also be helpful to many of those around me who've been interested in the same things. So,
dude, I learned so much from you the past few years that it's piecing a lot of different things together for me as well. So I very much appreciate that.
Well, wonderful. Well, let's land the plane now and let's talk again. And we know how to get in touch with each other. And yeah, keep thinking and keep sending me stuff, and I'll keep doing what I'm doing. And, maybe a little while from now, we'll know even more and have more to share.
Sounds good, Paul.
All right. Take care. We'll talk to you later.
Yeah.
Bye.